Hey YouTube, I've got something a little bit different here that you might not have seen on this channel, might not be expecting on this channel. I mean, we did just do a 5-part baking series, and now I'm gonna do an in-depth kind of editing workflow tutorial. I know this is kind of niche, but as most of you guys know, or at least hopefully some of you know, Allison and I do a lot of media work for our church. Our church is BaysideLifeChurch.com. You can check out our channel up there. With this pandemic, we've had to adjust what we're doing, and so we've been doing an online-only church on Facebook and YouTube that we've been premiering simultaneously on both platforms. We have a very tight workflow because I work a full-time job, and most of everyone else has a part-time job or a full-time job as well. And so we record on Wednesday, I edit on Thursday, I upload on Friday, and then we have church on Sunday. Because of that, I've had to develop a very streamlined workflow to deliver the best possible version of an online church in as little a time as possible. Because we have 2 toddlers. We have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so because of that, I can edit between 8 p.m. and midnight. Then I have to go to bed and get up at 5:36 for work the next day. So I have worked really hard to streamline and make it simple but good. And for those of you that don't know, our service setup looks like this. We have 2 main setups. We have one setup for all of our talking, and this is all of our announcements, our welcome, and our sermon. And those are all done with the same lighting setup, the same camera setup every week with the same 3 angles that we use. And that is to help streamline, and then also we don't have to set up and tear down in multiple locations around the church. Then our second setup is up on the stage with our worship team. We do a very stripped down worship. It's just an acoustic guitar, a piano, and both of them sing. We reset the lights, reset the cameras, do 3 camera angles, and record. And so I'm gonna talk you through not necessarily how we film and how we set up to film, but if that's something you'd like, and I can break that down the next time we film, I can do that. Just let me know down in the comments. I've had conversations with pastors of small churches like ours that have been producing some seriously great content, but their workflow has been a little insane. I had a friend that sent me a picture of his timeline, and I could see what he was doing, and he was manually editing his 3 different camera angles. And I was like, bro, you give me anxiety. Let me show you a way that you can not lose your mind, but then also deliver great content. When it comes to editing workflow, when it comes to putting together a great video, I break it down into 4 different sections: the sound, the scene, the shot, and the special. And so this isn't necessarily how to craft a video. These are just the steps to edit a video. So we're gonna dive into my laptop, and we're gonna talk about the first one, the sound. And so I'm gonna move down here, and I'm probably gonna shrink down and be just in the corner, and you're gonna see my screen. So here I have the project. We're gonna talk about our Mother's Day service, which was May 10th, 2020. And you can tell that it was for this service because it's called May 10th, 2020. And in here, I have all of my folders. When we record our talking head videos, so our announcements, our welcome, and our sermon, I record via a boomed microphone into a Tascam DR60. It's a little 4-channel audio recorder that records to an SD card, and it's great. And so I have that in here in this folder called the DR60 because that's the name of the device that recorded it. And so we have our 2 files. This is our main file and then our backup file. Moving down, the first camera that we're gonna talk about is my Canon M50. And this is with a 22mm f2 pancake lens that we use at like a 45-degree angle from our main camera. And this is gonna be our left camera. And as you can tell, it's in the M50 folder, all of my video files. Then we have the SL2 folder, which is the folder for all of my Canon SL2 footage, which is the other camera. It's our right side camera. And this one has a bit of a kind of a creative angle here. We shoot at a pretty much perpendicular angle to the speaker, And I use this mostly just for the sermons to add a little bit of mood and make it look a little bit better. Then we have our Ursa Mini folder, and this is our main angle. We shoot the main angle on a Ursa Mini 4K. It's the first model of Ursa Mini, and I shoot with the lens I'm actually using right now, which is the Tamron 17-50 f2.8, and it's shot wide open because that lens doesn't have aperture control on that camera. So that is in the Ursa folder. And then you'll see right here we have a PreSonus folder, and that is for when we record our worship set. We record essentially, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, this particular one we did 6 because we had a special spoken word. But I record to our PreSonus Studio Live 32 Series 3, which is a 32 channel digital mixer that can record to a SD card plugged right into it. And so it records each track on its own audio file, which I highly recommend. Don't just record the main output of your board. It's not what works live isn't going to work on a digital platform. It needs to be mixed. And so we're going to talk about that right now, because the first step in this whole workflow is the sound. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take my audio files, my PreSonus audio files and my DR60 audio files. And what I do is I bring them into Logic Pro X. And as you can see here, I have pretty much the whole service laid out. And you might notice that like I have the speaking parts up front and then the worship at the end, but in the finished video, we're gonna have the worship kind of in between, in the middle. I do this because it makes syncing up the video files a lot easier, because this is the order that we recorded it. We record all the speaking stuff first, and then we move to worship in case we need to redo a take. I'm not gonna talk about actually mixing the audio because that's a whole other topic for another day, but I am gonna suggest that you apply some compression, some EQ, and some volume adjustments to your audio no matter what before you send it to Premiere. And so right here we have our Tascam audio recording. This has everything, all the spoken. I just set it and let it record. And we have a RVox compressor, an EQ, and then I run some sibilance on it. Then I have all of my PreSonus audio files. So you see it says 3, 4, and then if I zoom in, it'll say 5 over here. 5, and then we have our pianos and guitar. The guitar, I usually just double it up to make it nice and sound nice and good. The reason I have a split right here is that we did 2 songs in 2 different keys, and I like to apply just a little bit of pitch correction just to smooth them out and make sure that they're hitting the right notes. And sometimes we don't have time for a retake, and we're not playing to a click, so we can't just start and stop where we're going. We'd have to start from the very beginning, and that's not always feasible. So what we do is our magical friend, Auto-Tune. So once that is done, then what I do is I come here and I use my loop feature, and you can do this in any audio editing workstation. I prefer Logic just because that's what I'm the most familiar with. That's what I've been using for about 10 years. I've been using Logic, and I really like it, and it has a lot of really cool stuff, and it's cheap. I mean, with Pro Tools right now, you have to have a subscription. Ableton is like $600-700 to really be able to do some cool stuff. And Logic for $200, you get tons and tons of software instruments that you can use to compose and record. And then also it's a great mixing tool. And they're always updating and always adding new features. So if you're on a Mac and you're looking for an audio workstation, I definitely suggest Logic. Then I'm going to export as a PCM. So I'm gonna export a WAV file with the maximum quality, 24-bit. I would do 32-bit if my recorder recorded in 32-bit. I include the audio tail and I normalize it, and we're gonna do it offline. And then sample rate is 4800 because that's the sample rate that cameras record audio at. Then we just click OK. And I'm gonna call it May 10th, 2020 audio or mix down. That's just kind of what I call it because I know that that file is my main audio file. I'm not gonna bounce it right now because I did that a week ago and we're not gonna sit around here and wait for it. Once I have the audio sounding good and I have the worship in pretty much the same volume as the speaking parts, then I'm gonna go ahead and export, and then we can move on to the next phase, which is the scene. And the scene is setting up our work environment in Premiere. And we're gonna import our footage, we're gonna synchronize our footage, we're gonna get it organized so that we can very, very quickly get the shot. And so the way I do it, you don't have to do it this way. If you are recording service with multiple cameras and a separate audio source, I strongly suggest you find the budget for Pluralize. It's from Red Giant, and it is a synchronization tool. You can throw all your video files at it, all your audio files, and it will synchronize everything, and it will give you a XML file that you can import into Adobe Premiere and get editing right away. It is steep, it's about 400 bucks, but I bought version 3 a long time ago and then upgraded to version 4 with a tax return. So that was fun. If you don't have it, I will show you a way to kind of sort of manually do this and the way I used to do it, but trust me, if you were to get Pluralize, it will save you tons of time and a lot of stress because it just kind of works. I have a new project open. Now the SL2 records in 1080 and the Ursa and the M50, I'm recording it in 4K. And so I want to drag one of those in first so that the sequence is a 4K sequence. So I'm just going to grab all my files and drop them in. Grab my Ursa files and I'm going to grab them and drop them in. And grab my SL2 files and drop them in. Then I'm also going to grab my mixdown file and I'm going to let it process. So once it says clips ready to synchronize, no matter how many you have, and we had a ton because we took a couple of takes and had to do a couple of additional things for this service. Worship, one of the songs took 2 takes. So then I'm just gonna hit the synchronize button and it's gonna do its thing and it's all synchronized. And now we're just gonna export our timeline, and then I'm going to do the export format Premiere Pro. And if you're in Final Cut, there is a way to do multicam editing. I haven't quite figured it out. I've been experimenting with Final Cut, but I'm not fully there yet to do a church service because I need to be quick, and so I'm using the software that I know the best, and that's Premiere. So we're going to choose Final Premiere. We're not going to create a sequence with the audio replaced. We want the audio mixed down to be our main audio, and we want those other ones in there because we're just going to delete them, so we don't want them to be replaced. So we're going to then export, and once it exports, we have our XML, and I have my previous one here saved. So I'm just going to go ahead and quit that and save, and I don't need to save it. I can just don't save. So now I'm going to jump into Adobe Premiere. Ignore. And so setting this up is pretty easy. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to make a new audio bin, demo. And I'm going to grab this XML file and I'm just going to drag it and drop it. What we have now is our timeline, and we have a lot of video clips and a lot of audio clips. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo linked selection, and I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up, and I'm going to delete these audio files. I believe this section is not one that we have to worry about for right now. We recorded an additional chapel that wasn't a part of the service, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. So now we have our 3 cameras. So we're going to talk about the sermon section first. This top one up here is our M50, then we have our SL2, and then we have our Ursa Mini. As you can tell, our SL2 footage is not 4K, so we're just going to go ahead and scale that up to 4K. So I'm just gonna drag and select all of these on this track because I know that this is our SL2 footage. So I'm just going to right click and set to frame size. And this is going to scale all of our footage up to 4K. I'm gonna show you guys how to do this synchronization if you don't have Pluralize. It's very simple. So what I'm gonna do is I have all my footage loaded up and I'm going to create a new sequence. It doesn't really matter what the sequence is. And I'm just gonna call this demo. Actually, no, I'm gonna call this one M50. And then I'm going to find my M50 footage. So this is all of our M50 footage. And so I'm gonna grab a couple of these clips because you're gonna do the same process for everything. I'm just gonna grab 3, bring them in, and we're gonna change sequence settings. So now it's a 4K clip. So now we have 3 sections. So now I have these 4 clips, and then what I'm just gonna do is I'm gonna drag that mixdown file in on a different audio track. And then I'm gonna take all of these files and I'm gonna move them to the very end so that they're behind my audio file. Then now the bummer is I can't just select all of these and have it do what I want it to do. The synchronize button is grayed out. We're gonna have to do this clip by clip. It can be tedious, but if you're recording on a camera that say splits up your 30-minute video file into 4 GB chunks, all you need to do is find out when the new clip has started if your footage was longer than a half hour. But all the other 4 GB clips, you can just group together and synchronize just the first one. So we're gonna select our audio and our first video clip, and I'm gonna right click and do synchronize. We're gonna choose audio, track channel mixdown, and then we're gonna let it do its thing. So now that we have our first clip synchronized, we can scroll over to it. And I'm going to use the razor tool, and I'm gonna slice this. I'm gonna slice off so that I have just the audio that's synced. Bring that back up to the very beginning of the timeline. Bring this audio, drag this audio clip over. Select both of these and synchronize again. Oh, that's the same clip. Just realized I dragged in 2 of the same clip. So, so we just have these 3 clips. So now I'm going to just grab this little short one, synchronize it, and click OK. Let it do its thing. And then we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do the razor tool at the very end of the clip. So we have just the portion that's synchronized, and bring this up until it snaps. So we're gonna synchronize and click OK. Now this should work most of the time. Occasionally you will have to sync it up manually. Hopefully it's just 1 or 2 clips and not every single clip, because that would take forever. So now that I have essentially all of these, we're gonna repeat this process for each of our cameras. So we have the M50, the SL2, and the Ursa. We would do that exact same thing. I'm just gonna mute the audio track from the actual video clip. Now, if you're following along with this step where you're not using Pluralize, I'm just gonna ask you to hold tight for just a minute, and we're now going to hop back into the Pluralize sequence. So we have our 3 cameras, and what I need to do is I need to make each one of those cameras their own sequence. I like to do this because it makes color correction and editing just a little bit easier. So I'm gonna select everything in this M50 track, and I'm gonna right click, and I'm going to nest it. And I'm gonna call this M50 Demo 2. So now that is an actual sequence over here in our timeline. We can actually open it up, and it's just the video files. That's awesome. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select my SL2 video files. I'm going to nest, and I'm going to do SL2 Demo 2. And now we have one of those. And I'm gonna do the same thing for my Ursa clips. Ursa Demo 2. So now I have 3 sequences that are all synced up and just one audio file. So if you're following along and you're not using Pluralize, I would just create a new sequence and then drag in all 3 of the sequences that we created. If you're not using Pluralize, I would suggest unchecking the linked audio and just keeping 1 copy of the audio and just selecting the video. We're gonna select these and we're gonna right click and we're gonna nest and we're gonna call this broadcast sequence. So now we have 1 sequence that we can turn into what's called a multicam sequence. And this allows us to view all 3 cameras or 6 cameras or 5 cameras or even just 2 cameras and be able to switch between all 3 as we edit. So I'm gonna right click it, I'm gonna choose multi-camera and then enable. And now I'm going to bring up this little screen, which is called the toggle multi-camera view. And this is going to show me all of my cameras. So now I have my scene. Now I can edit. So now we're gonna talk about the shot. And editing the sermon, what I do is very simple. I leave the sermon raw, or pretty much raw. And I just kind of have a pattern of about 1.5 minutes on the center camera, 30 seconds on the left camera, 1.5 minutes on the center camera, 30 seconds on the right-hand camera. And I can get through the actual sermon incredibly quickly. And so what I would do is I would navigate to a point where I have all 3 cameras and the sermon has actually started. So we're just gonna go ahead and start right here at 6:00 there. So we're gonna call that like the actual start of the sermon. And so I'm just going to grab these and sync them up there. And I have all these extra audio channels. I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go sequence, delete tracks, delete all empty tracks. And so now I can hit playing. And the cool thing about the multi-camera sequences is I can use the number keys to actually make my edits. And so if you look at it here, this first box here is camera 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I can do that by hitting keys 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on 2, and then I'm going to hit play. And I like to do, because I edit the sermon pretty much raw, what I will be doing is actually playing through at about 8 times speed. I just hit L on the keyboard a couple times until the audio stops playing and it starts going really fast. And but you don't really want to do that. So I'll just kind of show you, whoops, taxing the system. So I'm just going to kind of demonstrate how you would do that. So I'm playing the video file, and then I'm going to jump to camera 3. And it's going to go a lot slower right now because I normally edit off of an SSD. I'm editing off of a regular spinning disk hard drive, and I'm also screen recording as well as playing back 4K footage. So it's a lot going on, which is why you're seeing it this choppy. It's normally not. And so then I can just switch between my different camera angles. As I'm watching it, I can pause it, go back, and if I want to retime and edit, I can do that. And so I just switch between all these. And then when I hit the spacebar again, as you can see, all of my cuts have been made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the sermon and I'm going to edit all those different cameras. I'm going to get the shot. And I'm going to do this for our announcement sections. And I'm going to use cuts to hide jumbled words if I need to. So if I'm on this camera angle and say I need to cut out a word, then what I can do is I can actually edit a cut and say I need to make it jump to there. And I'm going to select and I'm going to do a ripple delete, which basically deletes a section and moves everything over to match it. And then I can switch the camera angle so that as he's talking, bam, it hides the cut or it hides the error. So once I've done that and I've grouped all of my sections, So I've got, you know, my sermon here, and I've got my announcements there. I can delete that, and then we're gonna go do worship. Then I'm gonna jump over to the actual broadcast file, and I'm gonna show, I like to recolor everything so that I know which is what is what. And so once I have, if you see all these edits, to do this manually would be exhausting. But with the multi-camera audio sequence, or the multi-camera sequence, I can just tap numbers as I'm watching it back. So once I have all the shots, now I'm going to assemble it into the order of the service. So we do a 2.5 minute countdown. I have that, I pull that from a different file. That's just ready to go, a video file that I just drag in, and I'm up and running. Then I've also created these lower thirds that I can just drag and drop into the file. And what this is this is just one file that's like 15 seconds long. And what I do is I go to a point where the animation has stopped, and I cut it and move the end animation to the end of where I want it to go. I'm going to zoom in, arrow back on my keyboard, and I'm gonna slice out just one frame. And I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna do add frame hold. And this basically just keeps that one frame, and then I can stretch it all the way across. And that's what I've done with these lower thirds. So once I have the scene, the sound, the scene, the shots, now it's time for the special. And I kind of covered a little bit of those lower thirds, just a quick way. This was just an After Effects template I found. I popped in my text, popped in the logo, changed the colors, exported it as a video file. I used the animation codec in After Effects. It's super huge, but it allows for transparency and is super high quality. Next, I'm gonna do something that's gonna help those of you that are adding lyrics, a very, very quick way to add lower third lyrics without having to mess with, you know, the Premiere's motion graphics or built-in templates or any of that kind of stuff. It's just gonna make it a lot easier, and you're not gonna have to have a lot of hassle. These lower thirds are just PNG files. They're just an image file. And the way I did that was I used a tool that you probably already have. If you're a church media person, you probably have ProPresenter, and you probably have slides kind of almost ready to go. And so what you can do is, the cool thing about the way ProPresenter licenses work is it is for one computer at a time, which means you can only have the program open on one computer at a time at your location. So if you are at home editing, you can open and authorize ProPresenter and be able to use it fully. And so what I've done is I have brought in my slides, and I have edited them to put 2 lines with the you know, squares and stuff, and then it's just transparent in the background. And so what you do is you click on your song and you click File, Export Document as slide images. We want to make sure we choose PNG because that's going to have a transparent background, and we can just plop them in. One thing to note is you want to make sure that your slide screen size matches your video. So for these, I had to make them 4K slides because it's a 4K video. And once we have that, then we can just import them. And I have this folder, lower thirds, and I just imported the whole folder. So you just double click and go to lower thirds, and I can, this was one that I'd done previously, and then it's gonna import them. And now we just have our slides, and then you just drag them on top onto this video channel, and I just play it back and then listen to when I need to do the slide change, and then I just trim it and then add the next one. And that's super simple, and it takes up your production just one more level. We do the same thing for our announcements. So if you're going to be giving a link or an address to mail giving envelopes to, you can just add that in right there, and then just a little audio tag. So if you'd like to check this sermon out, you can do that on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Bayside Life Church. I'll also link it down below. And that's it for the broadcast. What I'll do then is I'll duplicate this sequence and create a version for our Subsplash platform that doesn't have the worship. And then I'll do one for Instagram TV. Now I'll touch on this briefly, but this, you can only do this in the kind of the later versions of Adobe Premiere. Is I bring just the sermon sequence in, and I set my sequence settings. I change it to 1080 by 1920. I click OK, and then it usually gives you an error because the video file is, you know, bigger. And I like to switch all of the cameras to just the main camera, so it's looking straight on, and it's also easier to work with. And then what I do is I drag in this effect called auto reframe. And this is a really cool effect that creates all of these motion keyframes. So up here, this is it moving the actual image back and forth to kind of keep what's important in the center of the frame. And that creates my Instagram TV file that I then upload. As far as kind of export settings, they're not super special, but I export at a 4K video file, 24 frames a second, because that's what we film at, render at maximum depth, software encoding, and then I do what's called a constant bitrate. This gives me a very high quality file to upload to YouTube so that when YouTube compresses it to make it smaller, it retains as much quality as possible. I set this to 45. Now, I'm not going to touch on color grading and color correcting, because that's going to kind of be up to you. But this is just editing workflows. And then you can, now this is a big one that a lot of people don't know about, is when I go to export, I'm going to choose Q, and it's going to bring up Adobe Media Encoder. This is going to allow me to set up all of my encodes to run in a batch, and then I can go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and upload. So I can go here, and that's uploading. I'm going to go to my Subsplash. In this one, I have one separate that this is a 1080p file, and it's at a lower bit rate. I think that one was at 45. This one's at 16 at 1080. We're going to hit Q. And same thing for IGTV, which is a 1080 by 1920. And this one I actually do a frame rate conversion to 30 frames a second, because that's what Instagram plays all video back at. And this one, I think we're doing a constant bitrate of 7.5. We want to keep under 3 gigabytes for the file so that it can actually upload. Then what I'm going to do is I like to upload for our Subsplash platform. I like to upload a separate MP3 file. And so I'm just going to add a 256 MP3 to the Subsplash section. Oops, that didn't queue. And so this is the cool thing, is you can encode 2 versions of a file in one go. It's going to do both at the same time. And then to render, you're just going to hit the green Start Queue button and then upload the next morning, or in an hour, or depending on how fast your system is. So I know this seems a little bit scattered, and I might not have gone as crazy in depth, but I'll be hanging out in the comments. So if you have any questions, please ask them, and I'll probably make a follow-up video, or I will just be in the comments and replying back and answering them. I hope this helps. I know a lot of this stuff helped me once I figured it out. I was able to edit a lot faster, a lot smoother, and just get it done and also looking good. The only step after this is to upload. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. Maybe check out my baking videos. I'll link them up there or down there or somewhere. Thank you. Bye.